Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Green 19 podcast. I'm Dominique Yates. I'm joined by Ryan Wood and Tom Silverstein after the Green Bay Packers 2024 season comes to an end in the NFC wildcard game, losing to the Philadelphia Eagles 22-10. There is plenty to unpack after this game, and Ryan, I'll let you kick it off with just general takeaways, observations after the Packers season ends tonight.
You know, season-ending losses are always interesting because there's so much about this game that is obviously important because the season hung in the balance, but it also ushers you into an off season because the season is over. And a season-ending loss, especially in the playoffs, has its way of kind of refining who you are and exposing what needs to be worked on this off. A year ago, it was clear they had to overhaul their safety position, and they had to find a kicker. They had to fix their kicking problem. Those were the two big pressing needs. So there's a lot to get into tonight in terms of what happened. But I think that this is another loss where Brian Gutekunst has a very clear picture of what his to-do list is this offseason for this still very young team that is going to be right back in the thick of it in 2025, and where those priorities lie, what he has to get done. So it's kind of two tracks, and we'll talk about both. But that to me is kind of what's hanging in my mind is, look, they got to find more dynamic playmakers around Jordan Love. There were not a lot of guys open tonight. I think that's the most important thing because you've got a young, still developing quarterback that you need to help as much as you can for him to be better because he needs to be better. The defense did its job. It didn't get the takeaway it needed. More pass rush would have helped with that, but it played winning football. The offense was a mess. The special teams, obviously, the game was over. I mean, I did not see, as soon as that Keyshawn Nixon fumble happened, you knew it. Like this, other teams maybe they overcome something like that. This young Packers team treated any obstacle this season almost like it was the hill to die on. Like they just couldn't overcome things like that. So I didn't expect that to happen as soon as it happened, and sure enough, they never led. So there's things to get into tonight and the offseason. That's kind of where my mind is.
About time for you, just general takeaways and observations.
It's just like I predicted that they would lose.
That is wrong, and you gave me. Actually, you're really nice after the Vikings misprediction. So I'll be nice, Spoon.
And the crazy part about it is, if they had any type of offense, they could have won the game. They really, even with what that devastating play to start the game. If they could have just got anything going offensively, I think the Eagles were ripe for the picking. Mm-hmm. If they could have figured it out. Now, part of why the Eagles are so good is that their defense is so good. Mm-hmm. But this was a microcosm of what's been wrong with the offense the entire year. And I think even as much as personnel, I think they have to figure out what they want to be offensively next year. I think they have to figure out how do you marry a passing game with Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs is a game changer, as we saw. He almost did it single-handedly. Mm-hmm. But every team that's going to go somewhere this year is going to have a passing game. Mm-hmm. Kansas City got a passing game. Buffalo's got a passing game. Detroit's got a passing game. Even the Ravens, if you want to say they're a running team and they ran more than any other team, they still got a pretty dynamic passing game. And the Packers do not have a dynamic passing game. And I put that on the floor. I think somewhere along the way, when they switched to Josh Jacobs and then when Love got hurt, they did this whole single wing offense, and I don't think they ever got back to doing what they need to do with a quarterback like Jordan Love, which is throw the ball, figure out how to have a dynamic pass game. And I think that's got to be a big part of their offseason is figuring out how they put those two things together.
Hey, Tom, you put it on Matt LaFleur for this season, but the season's over now. So starting now, I put that on Brian Gutekunst because I think of all those dynamic passing games. I think of every single team that entered this NFC playoffs and every single quarterback, and it's who he's throwing to. When you absolutely got to have it. Jared Goff has Amon-Ra St. Brown. Sam Darnold has Justin Jefferson. Matthew Stafford has two guys, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. Jaden Daniels has Terry McLaurin. You got in Tampa Bay even Mike Evans. Like who does everyone else has that guy when you got to have it? Who does Jordan Love have to throw it to when he's absolutely got to have it? The answer to me is nobody. Like there's nobody consistently that you can trust to just win that matchup every single time in a big moment like every other team has in this NFC playoff. Brian Gutekunst has to go get that guy this offseason. It has to be done. And I don't think you do that by getting younger because there's plenty of youth already.
Well, I don't know who that guy is. I mean, I think they need to draft somebody, but all the guys you mentioned were drafted pretty high. I just think that, you saw what they could be last year with what when their offense, when they were designed to be an offense that spread people out, that used Aaron Jones as an outside threat, kind of made it difficult for teams to sit back in coverage like Philadelphia did. They figured out ways to get guys open. They figured out how to exploit the blitz. And I just don't think they did a good job of that this year. They need a veteran wide receiver, somebody they know who can get open. But they thought Christian Watson was that, and he was that until he got hurt at the end. I just think they have got to figure out how to, even if they do get that wide receiver, they still have to figure out how do we become a passing, a dangerous passing attack without giving up Josh Jacobs, without giving up what he brings to the team. And I think that's a lot like Baltimore has kind of figured out, is how to use Derrick Henry and then use the, great arm of Lamar Jackson too.
Yeah, I guess one thing that really stands out to me with this team, all of the mistakes that were, like, they made consistent mistakes. There were no such thing as new mistakes from the self-inflicted wounds. I think that was very fascinating to me, and I don't really know, like, how do you chalk it up? You can't really say youth as an excuse. What do you kind of make of so much of those mistakes and just the flags thrown, just all the little things that they did game after game after game?
I think a lot of this is youth. I think when you look at this roster, how many established veterans do they have? And I can think of, 5? And one of them on offense, you got Josh Jacobs, you got Rashawn Gary, you've got Xavier McKinney. You kind of have Jair Alexander, although not really. You have Elton Jenkins. And that's the list. Everyone else from the quarterback on down is young. So it's a young man's game, and you would rather skew too young than too old for sure. But you do need some veteran experience on this specific roster. There's a difference between knowing what to do and actually having the capacity to do it. For example, the Packers knew absolutely that the one thing they could not do tonight against this Eagles team was lose the turnover battle. Nick Sirianni's now 29-2 when he wins the turnover battle. If you lose the turnover battle to the Eagles, you lose the game. That's how it works. Yeah. And on the very first play, they fall behind in the turnover battle. And then they make it worse with Jordan Love throwing 3 picks, entering the game, having 7 straight games without an interception. And I don't fault Jordan Love for that first one, because at some point you got to try to force a play. And 40 yards down the field is essentially a punt. He tried. I give him credit. Not all picks are bad. That was a good pick. You got to try. But the second one, not to see Zach Bond lurking underneath, I mean, you got obviously, stating the obvious, you have to see the linebacker, and he threw it right to him. So they knew can't lose the turnover battle against this Nick Sirianni team, and what do? They lose 4-0.
4-0.
That's what young teams do. Yeah. There's a gap between knowing what to do and actually being able to do it.
Similar thing for you, Spoon. Do you just kind of chalk it up to youth, or do you, what do you kind of make of it?
I mean, I think there's a disciplinary factor here, too. Mm-hmm. I mean, you cannot have the penalties they had, the roughing personal foul penalties. Yeah. Those were damaging. You have to be, I don't know, you have to be more disciplined than they were. I understand that Philly's defensive line is really tough to block, and you throw a rookie in there. But, the guy has to not hold 2 times and then be an ineligible receiver, another time.
Yeah.
You just can't do that, and you have to figure out ways. I'm going to be really interested to see if he makes changes on the staff. I'm not blaming it all on their assistant coaches, but, he kept going to Robert Saleh, kept going to Luke Getsy, to find answers. And I don't know if he has confidence in what guys are teaching or what. So I'm going to keep an eye on that. But they definitely, from just a discipline standpoint, have to be better than they were.
Yeah, I guess that's the other thing. Josh Jacobs talked about it too in the locker room, just saying, like, the roster's going to look different next season. And it was funny and fascinating hearing his comments. He's like, I'm going to go out and try to get some guys myself. So that's one thing I'm curious about, just what that offseason looks like, what players will be in. But also, that's a point I didn't even think about, like, with the staff. Like, how different will this look, next season? Just, you got any feelings or thoughts on, the attacking and what it might look like moving forward?
They got a lot of cooks in the kitchen all over the place too. I mean, they essentially have 2 receiver coaches. Jason Vrabel was the receiver coach forever, and now he's the offensive passing game coordinator. And Ryan Mahaffey is the receivers coach, but they still have Jason Vrabel. Like, it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, right? I mean, does there need to be a paring down of the staff and more streamlined? To have fewer voices and more authoritative voices, or not. But I still, I go back to personnel. There were not a lot of guys open tonight. Any time a receiver was downfield, he was covered. And yes, Jordan Love has to make more plays. That's why they pay him $55 million a year. But he's also, understandably, has a contract, because this is the business, how the business works. This is what the Packers had to do this offseason. This is how the NFL works. He's got a contract that's ahead of his development right now. So you can't expect him to make $55 million a year plays in his second season when he's still trying to figure it out. And you have got to help the guy. He's got to make more plays. I understand that. But you got a young quarterback that you have to help as much as possible. They've done it essentially the opposite that they did it in Chicago. They gave Jordan Love this great offensive line that is a big reason why they're so good running the football, one of the best top 5 rushing offenses in the league, and a big reason why he doesn't get sacked much. I mean, they've got this young quarterback, a really good offensive line. Go get him guys that can get open. Help him out, because there weren't guys open tonight. Most of the night, everywhere he threw, they were covered.
So do you rank it in terms of needs? Receiver, pass rush, corner,
yes.
Flip it around? That's how you rank it?
That's how I would rank it.
Yeah.
And the reason being, I'm not saying, look, pass rush and corner are needs that they could get better at on the roster. I'm not saying it's not. Josh Jacobs mentioned, I'm going to go get some guys. Well, he's played with Max Crosby. That may be a trade possibility. He's played with Devontae Adams. I'm not saying Devontae Adams is the answer, but maybe he is. I don't know. But the reason receiver is the top of the list for me is because when you have a young quarterback who has all the tools you want, all the tools you need, and your job is to get him there and he's not there yet, you want to continue pouring into that guy, make it as easy as possible for him. That, to me, is the priority.
For you, with receiver, pass rush, corner, how do you rank
I don't
it?
know. I haven't really thought about it that much yet. I still think even if you had a dynamic receiver, what the Eagles did to them was made it hard for anybody to get open. And that's where if you have this running back who teams are really keying on, I don't see enough play action. I don't see a movement game where they're rolling guys out and the bootleg stuff. I kind of think they got away from all of that after Love got hurt. And I don't think they ever came back to it and figured out a way, if teams are getting after you at the blitz, figure out a way to get him outside and free where he has a little bit more time. When he has time, often it doesn't matter about the coverage. He's pretty good. I thought they got run over a few times out there, like Zach Tom picked a bad day to have his worst day. I think they've got to reevaluate their offensive line too and figure out whether they have the right guys in the right places. They're going to lose some guys. They may lose Josh Myers. They may not. Maybe Zach Tom needs to be at center, and maybe they need to figure out something with Jordan Morgan. I don't know what they're going to do there, but I am more confident about their pass rush than I was, like middle of last season. I think it's kind of come on at the end, and I thought they did a great job rushing Hurts today. I mean, he was under pressure a lot. They had someone breaking free constantly. I do think receiver is a priority, but I really think they got to work on their offense and figure out, how they can get Josh Jacobs and work off of him with that passing game. I just don't think they ever did that.
The blueprint is out on this Packers offense. Every defense in the league down the stretch did the same thing. Mm-hmm. If you play two shell on this Packers offense, you put that umbrella coverage on, and you can at least provide a formidable run defense. Josh Jacobs might get his 80 to 100 yards, but if you give him his 80 to 100 yards and give up no explosives, just keep the lid on the top of that defense, that's how you beat this Packers offense. They don't have an answer for that. You saw the Eagles do it. You saw the Vikings do it a couple of weeks ago. Every defense doing the same thing. What do you do when that's the case? You got to have Jordan Love's got to be more accurate. You got to throw him out of that coverage, but you also need to have a guy that can take the top off anyway. You got to have a dynamic guy. They don't have that guy, and that's why you saw every defense do the same thing.
Was there anything from Matt LaFleur's press conference that stood out, or any takeaways from it?
When it was answer to Pete Doherty's question about the lack of dynamic explosiveness in the passing game, and he said that even in the quick game that they try to go to, it was like you get it to them and they get smacked in the back right away underneath, and then they try to do the double moves, the out and ups, and there was nothing there. I'm not saying Matt LaFleur intentionally did this by any means. I heard a head coach that's pleading for more playmaking around his quarterback, because it's pretty damning when you can't have any separation whatsoever. Yeah. No matter what you're doing underneath, double move, doesn't matter. You don't have it.
Yeah. Just for you, just wanted to get. Was there anything that you maybe heard in the locker room or from LaFleur, or anything that you found interesting or fascinating at all?
I think they were frustrated by some of the officiating, by some of the holding calls, and I think the last play, they probably should have got a PI on the last interception. But hey, that happens. That's Keyshawn Nixon, I thought, had the ball on the kickoff.
I thought he did too.
Yeah. And I'm really surprised that didn't get overturned. Yeah. But okay, so that happens. So you're not getting calls. Well, first of all, win your division and play at home, and you probably get some of those calls. It's a lot different. I just kind of felt like I don't know how serious they are about doing a real deep dive into what has gone wrong offensively, because they don't need to do much on defense.
No.
I do wonder, whether Bisaccia sticks around, whether he's had enough and decides he wants to retire or something like that. I don't know what his thinking is, but their special teams underperformed. I don't think they played as well as he would want them to. It'll be interesting to see what he does there and what changes. So, no, nothing he said on there was, stood out really to me. It was pretty much, standard for what happens when you get your butt kicked on the road.
You didn't ask this, but something that stood out about Jordan Love's press conference was kind of acknowledging that, a lot of the movement stuff, they did get away from it. To your point, Spoon, I think I'm curious what you think too, Spoon, but I wonder if they get back to the movement stuff. It makes no sense that a team with Josh Jacobs that in a scheme that is built on play action can't scheme something up. Josh Jacobs should be Jordan Love's best friend. His presence alone should help the passing game in a way that we just didn't see. So getting back to that movement stuff and then getting more personnel, I wonder if that's enough to get this offense back on track. Because I'm with you. I think that they kind of got themselves stuck in the middle, and when Jordan Love had his injury, they never got back to some things that they entered the season with and really are foundational to this offense. Getting back to that, having more dynamic personnel on the perimeter. Luke Musgrave's injury, I don't think helped, because when you have that power run game and you can have two really, really solid tight ends, that's helpful. And they just never had that either. Could Luke Musgrave develop into a more consistent playmaker this offseason? I think that's a big question.
Injuries, it's kind of unique because we talked so much about how they were pretty lucky with the injury perspective, and then they were falling left and right in this game. We talked about Josh Myers, Romeo Dobbs, Jaden Reed, and Devontae Wyatt went down, and there's just so many guys left and right that went down. Elton Jenkins.
That was disastrous.
How many of those were hits by the Eagles? I mean, they are pretty badass, you know. They put some licks on you.
They do.
And I mean, you know, Elton Jenkins took a helmet to the shoulder. Mm-hmm. Reed took a shot.
Dislocated the shoulder, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, Myers was just a freak accident, and they're lucky he was okay. Mm-hmm. I thought for sure he had a fractured leg. Mm-hmm. And they did too. They were surprised that the x-ray came out okay. Which is good for him too, by the way, since he's a free agent. God, you'd hate to see that.
Yes.
You know, a guy lose all that money because of that. With 2 minutes left in the game. Yeah. But I sort of lost my train of thought here. But I don't know. You know, they were lucky, and things should have gone their way better than it did. I mean, you're lucky when you can go that long without so many injuries.
Yeah.
I mean, other than Jair Alexander, that's really the only guy and Jordan Morgan that they lost for the year. Mm-hmm. That was really bad. Maybe Marshawn Lloyd. Yeah. So, you know, next year, you never know. They're going to have to build their depth.
Yeah.
What you just said, of all the injuries tonight, Elton Jenkins was the most disastrous by far.
Yeah.
He played 1,071 snaps in the regular season. And Kadeem Telford and Travis Glover. Travis Glover came in first.
I don't understand
penalties.
Why he came in first. I mean,
because he hadn't throughout the year.
Yeah. I was a little surprised by that too.
Telford had been the first guy off the bench.
Yeah. Travis Glover has the ineligible that makes it 1st and 15, the first time in the red zone. Next drive, on back-to-back 1st and 10s, he has 2 holding penalties. And then even Kadeem Telford had a holding penalty as well. So 4 penalties from those 2 guys, who combined, by the way, for 36 snaps all regular season. The Packers, I think there's this train of thought that Josh Myers is just gone. And I wonder if that's really the case.
They like him a lot.
LaFleur
likes him a ton.
And I'll tell you, in my mind, I'd think long and hard before I do anything to change this offensive line, because we saw tonight there's not a lot of depth there behind them. All 5 starters, counting the playoffs this season, exceeded 1,000 snaps. This was a top 5 rushing offense. This was a quarterback that had a pretty clean jersey most weeks. The offensive line has a lot to do with that. They got fortunate with the injuries. You have to get fortunate to have 5 starting offensive linemen go over 1,000 snaps. But they were at the center of pretty much everything good with this offense. When you think of where this offense needs to be better, to me, it's on the perimeter. It's not the offensive line. I'd be real tempted just to run it back with those guys, because I think they did a lot of good things, and I don't know that they have the depth right now to be able to have just hey, Josh Myers walk out the door, and Zach Tom, here you go, play center, and who's your right tackle? Who's behind? They don't have that much. What we saw tonight, they don't have that much depth.
I'd keep building depth. I would, you know, I wouldn't be afraid to take somebody in the 2nd or 3rd round, you know, a tackle. You know, they need to keep challenging guys. They need to keep challenging Sean Ryan. They need to keep challenging Rasheed Walker, I think, you know. even Zach Don, and Elton Jenkins isn't going to last forever. Elton Jenkins has got a lot of miles on him. So, they got to keep building that. They need to get to the point where it's like the Eagles' offensive line, where you just, or the Lions' offensive line, where you just know they're going to protect the quarterback. But, yeah, I mean, again, you asked me earlier, if I was drafting, I'd want a playmaker first. Yeah. And then pass rush, I think they're in pretty decent shape. I think they've developed some good young guys, and they still have a lot of depth on the defensive line.
Yeah, and not only that, it's especially the defense. If there isn't, at least from people, the optimism of the potential of the defense at this point, it would be pretty a head scratcher if not, because of the depth that they built, the veteran pieces that they added with Xavier McKinney. The rookies really showed some potential with Edrin Cooper, Evan Williams, Javon Bullard. So there's so many pieces in place in terms of when you're thinking of the future, it's going to be good. But I guess going back to the point of players, you kind of talked about Josh Myers. Is there any other guys you're curious about in terms of their future looking at next season, or is it too early to tell?
Yeah, I mean, that's got to play out. Yeah, but to the point you were making before, I asked Rashawn Gary, now the season's over, how far did you guys really come in this scheme from September to now? And his reaction, his nonverbal reaction, just kind of whew. It was a long way that they came. And you got to remember, and it's easy to forget, as good as they played, this was their first year in a new scheme. This was a radical change from a 3-4 to a 4-3. And I think what they really did here was lay a really strong foundation defensively to think going into 2025, they ought to be expectations absolutely top 10 defense. They ought to be pretty good on defense second year in this Jeff Hafley scheme. You've got a defensive coordinator that you should have a lot of trust in. He had a phenomenal first season, and it doesn't mean if you think that if Max Crosby's available, you think going and getting him really moves the needle, that you shouldn't do that, or that you can't keep adding with premium assets in the draft at corner, at edge rush, even at interior defensive pass rush. You should always keep getting better, but I think you ought to feel real good if you're the Packers about what you were able to establish this first season in a new scheme, and they could be real good next year.
Yeah, you should probably figure that next year is Hafley's last year.
Yeah.
I mean, he's going to get if they have another year like that, he's going to get calls, and he probably will. I would bet he would interview for a job still here, especially after this game. So LaFleur has to make sure that he can get him back, and then if he does come back, it's probably his last year. So you better do something next year with that group, or have him make sure he's mentoring someone to take over the defense.
Yeah. Spoon, the last thing we want to touch on, he mentioned special teams earlier. I just didn't get you. You didn't have a chance to voice your thoughts on it. Just, what did you make of just not only this game, but, I mean, it's been a rough outing for Rich Bisaccia's group throughout this season, and it's been for almost the whole season. Like I said, Brandon McMahon has kind of saved the day and kind of put a Band-Aid on some of the wounds, if you will, throughout some of these games. But, just what were your impressions of special teams?
I think it says something. Look, it's a playoff game for the Packers, so of course there's a kicking malfunction, right? But it said something that Brandon McManus can go out and miss a 38-yard field goal, and there's no he's warranted being re-signed this offseason. The Packers have found their kicker. It doesn't matter what he did tonight. He made 20 of 21 in the regular season, and that's a good place to start when you're building a special teams, because as we've seen, nothing puts your special teams in peril on shaky ground quicker than not having the kicking solution, and they have that. So go out, re-sign him. Danny Whelan had a good night. You've got your punter in place. Then it's just shoring it up. And I do think that when you are the youngest team in the NFL, your youngest, most unproven players are the ones playing special teams. And
that's true everywhere, though. That's true with every team.
But not every team is the youngest team in the NFL. Only one is, and that's the Packers. So you're even younger, and you're going to have even more issues. I think that's part of this. With that said, they weren't coached up to a point of discipline that it wasn't an issue all season. And it has to stop being an issue. And that is on the special teams coordinator to make that happen. And it didn't. So there's, there's a certain level of dumb, young stuff that's going to happen on special teams, especially for this group. But it doesn't have to keep happening the way it has.
Do you have anything you wanted to add, or you had a point you're making?
No, and I'm not trying to trash Bisaccia. I mean, if they brought him back, it's fine. But, at some point, you'd like your special teams to force the action. So they're kind of a reactive special teams. They don't go after punt blocks all that often. They don't do any kind of trick stuff. They don't do really anything that isn't just solid. They're solid special teams, and they're well coached from that standpoint, but they don't do anything extraordinary. I don't know if that's possible, or if what they're getting out of it is enough, but you would like to see them have an effect on the game, a little bit more of an effect on the game.
Yeah. Well, look at the Jaden Reed 20-yard punt return. How many times have we seen explosive plays this season from the Packers special teams? Not very often, but they got one, and that was huge. That was a huge play. I mean, should have led to points. It led to a missed field goal, but that was an offense that needed some dang help. And then they get a 20-yard punt return. If you can actually get that more consistently, it helps.
Yeah,
for sure.
As we near the end of the podcast, guys, any final words, final thoughts? Obviously, we'll still have more, pods with everything that's still, because it's like the season's over, but there's still plenty of work to be done. But as we're kind of, in a way, putting a ribbon on 2024, just any final words and thoughts?
It ended like it started, so, it was, everything goes full circle, and it's not this is the 30, let's see, wait, 1, 2, 3. This will be the 32nd time that the Packers have lost a playoff game that's ended the season. The other times they either lost in the Super Bowl or won the Super Bowl in my time. So happens to all but 31 teams, and then you just wait for next year. That's what the fans got to do.
Yeah.
My mind, frankly, has kind of already shifted to 2025 because I've known, and I'm not just me, I think we've all known for a while this wasn't going to be the year. I think that it was very clear that this was not quite ready to be a Super Bowl team, and lo and behold, it wasn't. But they're also very, very early in this process. It's not like it's an aging team that it was a few years ago that's nearing the end of a chapter. They're at the beginning of the chapter, and everything they do now is going to really dictate what this chapter becomes. And it's a huge off season, and I'm already kind of thinking about it. And we're going to talk to Brian Gutekunst at some point this week, you would think. And something big on my mind that I'd love to know how he approaches it is the value of age. It's totally opposite of what they were a few years ago when they needed to get younger, and they sure did. Mm-hmm. It's a young man's game, but the value of age. I'm not a football scout. I'm not a talent evaluator. I have no idea if specifically a Devontae Adams is the answer or not. I have no. He's 32, not ideal age. I don't know. I don't know how many good seasons he might have left. But if he's got one or two more good seasons, if he does, if that in the front office, that's their talent evaluation. Where are they at? Are they at a point where it's worth making a trade for a guy that might only give you a couple seasons, but it might move the needle? You feel like it moves the needle for a year or two? What's the value of that? Bringing in a veteran, bringing in more age at positions of need, even if you don't have that long term. I wonder how Brian Gutekunst views that.
Yeah, I guess finally for me, 2024 it was an interesting year. Not only me personally, the first year on the beat, but it was interesting covering this team because in a way it was kind of dull in a way because there was nothing new that happened. Like we talked about the same issues. We talked about the same things, and outside of what the incident, you could say, with Romeo Dobbs, and he had the suspension, it was a relatively quiet team. I think that was what was kind of unique about the team, and it was still a cool experience for me traveling and doing the show with you guys. It's more of just the personal side of things, but it was just an interesting thing. Look forward to 2025, but even more so, I'm looking forward to sleeping a little bit too.
I think that's first of all, it's great having you with us this season, and looking forward to many, many more. But I think that's why mentally there's a little bit of pep in my step here, because tonight was we're all after the same thing. We want answers. That's what we want to know how it's going to be, what's going to come next. And tonight, in many ways, to me, was a final resolution, what we've seen coming for a long time, which it happened in many ways just the way that we expected. The defense do enough, the offense not there, self-inflicted mistakes are avoidable and beat you, and that's what they did all year. This was a final resolution. Now it's what next, and we got the answers. So what comes next, I'm really curious to see.
On to 2025. Get ready for it. So we thank you all for checking out the Green 19 podcast. Once again, guys, it was fun this season. We'll still have plenty of podcasts throughout, you can say, the offseason to talk more about the Packers. And again, we have to watch Spoon coach later this summer.
I'm not going to take it easy, Spoon.
No, not at all. Not at all.
I expect every win.
I expect you to be yelling at me from the side and tweeting all kinds of nasty stuff.
Oh,
and I'm not saying
It's
win
like
every
all the
game.
bloggers.
It's coming.
I'm not saying win every game. You got to win every inning. Yeah. Every inning, Spoon.
Yeah,
Okay.
I want you to be prepared because every game is a big game. And don't downplay any games. Every game is a big game.
Want to know each week. Want to know each week.
Yeah, take every team seriously. We don't
Trust
take
your fundamentals.
Let me write this down.
That's right. Awesome, guys.
We have plenty of suggestions
That's
for you.
right. Let's get out of here. We'll get back to Green Bay. And again, we'll keep you updated on everything with the Packers as they talk about offseason and 2025 and more. So again, thank you for checking out this podcast. For Ryan Wood, Tom Silverstein, I'm Dominique Yates.